Good morning and welcome to Let's Coach 2023. I am Lani Kim and I am one of the coaches here on campus at Life Coach University. So if this is your first time, welcome. And I want to encourage you to check out the campus. There is a coach here every day, as well as our other workshops that we have. And there's so much value to get from your time here. So I want to encourage you to look around the campus. If if you're returning to campus, welcome back. We're so glad you're here again. So today I wanted to talk about rest because it's been heavily on my mind. And it's one of the habits of life that we so often not just push to the side, but neglect. And the reality of that really hit me this past week. So I wanted to share and discuss rest because I want you to feel rested. I want you to know what it's like to not only understand rest, to know what it's like, to put it into your life, to incorporate it into your life. And I also want you to understand what is the point of rest and how do you identify when it is time to rest. So there's some pre-work, there's some planning that goes with rest, and then there's obviously the execution of rest. And this is really not a skill we're taught so much. And I think actually we almost look down upon rest as something that we don't do as adults, right? So when we're young, obviously as infants and as toddlers, and I remember even in school, we had nap time. So when we're young, we're encouraged to rest, right? Make sure you get to sleep on time. Make sure you're getting, when you're really young, 12 hours. I mean, I think infants, it's much more than that. It's been a while since I've had an infant, but maybe 16, 18 hours of rest, right? Then down to 12. But even as children, we still are encouraging to get 8 to 10 hours, right? And it's only, I feel like maybe when you go off to university, college, step into a job that all of a sudden that idea of rest and getting enough hours is something we're told, but there's not a whole lot of value that we actually see in it, right? Because if we highly valued something, we would find ways to create that, to execute on that, right? So if rest was just a huge, huge priority or top priority of ours, we would find a way, right? So this idea is kind of pulled back away from us. And as adults, it's almost like we're told, oh, so you're an adult now, you're a grown up now. You don't need to rest, or it's not valuable that you rest, right? You've done all your physical growing, and maybe even we are given the impression that we're mentally done growing, which is completely not true physiologically. Your body and your body is actually still developing into your 20s, and neurologically that is also happening. Maturing of the brain is also happening into your 20s. So when we go off to when we're young, and either whether we're going off to college or whether we're working, whatever it may be, and we are given this freedom to stay up as long as we want, to maybe even go where we want, that's actually a critical time of development for us. And yet we're not taught that. We're taught the opposite, right? Like, go have fun, do the all-nighters, when really that is still such a critical part of our development of our brain and our body. So we're given these messages, conflicting messages, right? At a very early age. So no wonder that we really don't understand the value of rest. So I want you to think back, right, on what was rest like for you when you did rest on a regular basis. Was it in toddlerhood that you stopped napping and taking rest times? Was it later in life? I do remember, though, as a teenager, especially on the weekends, sleeping in if I could, if I didn't have sports, and sometimes taking naps when I got home from school, which obviously should tell us a lot about our bodies and what message that they're giving us, right? And now in the States, at least, the acknowledgement of the importance of rest is something that's at least been on people's minds for teenagers for the last maybe 5, even 10 years. So the times that schools start in some places have been pushed back so that students are not waking up so early, because the research right now is showing that the critical sleep time extends farther than sometimes the time they're supposed to be starting school. So some schools have pushed back the start time for, I think, especially high schoolers. So maybe there's some hope here that as a culture, we are realizing how important that rest is, and as a culture, shifting how we do things, right? I think definitely during this global pandemic, we've really learned to appreciate the idea of rest. So maybe as a culture, we're headed in a more positive direction of rest. But nonetheless, we are still responsible for ourselves. And until that happens, we need to take on the responsibility of learning what rest looks like for us as individuals. So the first thing is actually not how to rest. I think in theory, most of us know different ways to rest, right? Take a nap, go read a book, go sit outside, maybe even go to a coffee shop by yourself. Don't have electronics with you, right? So we have these concepts, but it's almost like learning to play a sport and understanding a strategy, right? What becomes important to make that strategy effective is knowing when to use the strategy. So we have to learn when to use our rest strategies. And that takes knowing ourselves and understanding what within ourselves is our criteria for taking a rest. Number one, do you incorporate it into your daily life, right? And sometimes it has to start off small. And when I mean small, I mean increment of time, right? Or even the effort. It might be very simple, right? So can you commit every day, let's say at 3:00, to taking a 5-minute break, meaning no phones, no computer, right? No, if you have formal work to do, you're not doing that. You're just sitting there, and yes, reading a book, or just enjoying if you have an office with a view or you're someplace where the view is nice, maybe just walking around the block once. So that's one thing to do, right? Starting to make rest part of your daily routine in a small and simple way. But also, until you build that up, right, to maybe at least getting to 15 minutes to half an hour each day, what do you do in the meantime, right? The other thing to do is now decide what are your personal criteria. How do you evaluate when you need rest? So for me, I knew I was lacking rest when I fell asleep and I woke up the next morning and just almost like I had a blackout. I woke up and I thought, I don't even remember going to bed. And I, personal confession, I hadn't brushed my teeth. And I thought, wow, that never happens to me. I tend to be a night owl, which is something I have to always constantly work on, not staying up too late. But I, by nature, am a night owl. I get this second wind right around the time people want to rest. My body's kicking into gear. And I've always kind of been like that. It's not just after becoming a mom or anything. It's just something that my circadian rhythm, the way my body works. So I do have to very intentionally work on that. But I knew if I had just fallen asleep without any effort and intentionality, I knew that my body was maxed out, and whether it's mentally or physically, and I really needed to do something about that. So obviously I don't want to get up to that point, but that definitely is on my list of, wow, we know we need some rest when that happens. But how do we go before that and not have that happen? So going back, right? Where are the alarm bells? Where are the kind of symptoms? Where's my symptoms list, right? So for me, is when I start to skip workouts, I know that my body and my mind really need some rest. I am a creature of habits, and I like my checklists, and I like to check everything off my checklists. And typically, even if I'm physically tired, the satisfaction of working out supersedes the tiredness that I feel at that moment. But when I started to skip workouts, that's when I know that my body and my brain really need a rest. When I start to waver and I'm not consistent in my morning routine and things start to drop off, or initially, usually for me, it looks like this. Just this one time, this, whatever it might be in morning, I'm going to do that in the afternoon when I'm done with so-and-so, right? So I'm taking my morning routine usually is the stuff that are my highest priorities, right? Sometimes I can't control, like if I have something scheduled at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and it's a priority. Well, that's all I can do, right? I can't make it earlier, but on the daily basis, the things that I like to get done every single day, those I really try to get 90% of it part of my morning routine, right? So obviously cooking dinner and spending time with my kids, that is done later in the day, right? Those are priorities, but done later in the day. But the rest of it is done in the morning. So when I start to compromise on that, like I said, it's not totally dropping it off. It's more moving it, right? So the stuff that's such a priority, when I start to take something from there and move it over and start to do it after things that are not the highest priority, that's when I know that my priorities and my actions are out of order And it probably has to do with the fact that I am putting too much on my plate and I'm not respecting my priorities. So that's when I know. That's my symptom tracker that I am starting to head in a direction that is not the greatest for my body and my mind. And then when I start to skip out on not the daily things, but then the weekly regular things, it's kind of my like second line of not defense, but second line of symptoms, right? So these things I do weekly, and I start to think, maybe just this 1 week, I won't be able to show up or whatever it might be. That's my secondary set of symptoms. Now, falling asleep without my knowledge, that is high alert. And so that was on my mind. And I thought, wow, how we talk about rest, I think, in society. I think we do have a better idea of the value it has, but I don't know so much that it's almost like a should. We should value it, and we know that, but knowing that it should doesn't always tell us how to actually do that. And how do we know when to do that, when to rest, right? And how do we not make it an overwhelming thing that is like another thing on our to-do list, right? Because so often that's how it feels. You should rest. Oh, great. One more thing for me to do, right? So how do we start even before we hit the critical points, right? So number one, it's to have some type of daily rest to even prevent ourselves from getting to that point, right? But then when do we know that we're starting to head in a not so great direction for our bodies and our minds, right? Like I said, for me, when that morning routine goes and I start to fiddle with that, it's a huge indicator for me. So, and then when the daily things start to drop off, and definitely when I start to let go of the hobbies that I like, right? Or the pleasurable things that I like, the everyday little things here and there that I try to throw in. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to do brain puzzles. I know this sounds so ironic, before I go to bed, which sounds like the antithesis of what I should be doing. But my mind tends to it doesn't tend to think just straight ahead. It tends to think like this, and to pull my brain into getting all those thoughts narrowed down to just one focus. That's what brain puzzles help me to do. It's kind of to lessen the white noise, the way that I think about it. And then from there, just calming down myself and focusing on one thought really helps me. And I will start to nod off actually when I do these brain puzzles. You can see like little pen streaks across my puzzle page. So that's personally just for me. That may be the opposite for some of you. But when I start to skip that step, then I know I'm really rushing. It's almost like, oh, gotta get to bed, hopping and diving into bed. And I will sometimes fall asleep out of exhaustion, but I don't get a good quality of sleep. I'll wake up, I'll be uncomfortable because my brain and body are still kind of hyped up, even though technically I'm sleeping, right? So that practice of taking even like 3 to 5 minutes, sometimes as short as that, to just allow my brain to not be thinking all over the place, but to just allow it to start to focus on one thing, that's huge. So my encouragement to you is, where are your markers, right? That's step one, right? The how to rest part actually comes much, not, I wouldn't say easy, but we kind of know what to do. It's a matter of discipline and priority to put those into place. But like I said, how do we even prevent the ultimate burnout, right? Or even not even ultimate burnout, but just starting to head down that route, is understanding where those symptoms are starting, right? And like I said, you might have different tiers of symptoms, right? But just even acknowledging that and starting to ask yourself on a regular basis, once you have it laid out. And yes, mine looks like a checklist. Okay, it's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 of symptoms. But getting into the habit of asking yourself, am I, for me, putting my daily routine or morning routine, is that in jeopardy? Am I starting to let go of weekly things? Am I starting to let go of exercising? Am I starting to let go of that quiet time right before I go to bed? That's kind of my symptom tracker. What does yours look like, right? That is step, like the pre-work before actually getting to the work, because you might actually have a good idea of what the work looks like, right? I mean, we see these memes, right, and posts about rest and how to rest, what to do. So you actually may have a really good idea of actually how to do the rest, but it's more the when do you do these things. Like I said, the best thing is to daily have some type of routines where you're getting rest, right? But if you don't have that in place, or that's difficult for you, or you're building that up, right? How do you know for sure you need to take some time away, right? All right. Thank you so much for being here. And I would love to hear, we at Life Coach University would love to hear your feedback on any of the workshops or sessions that you have been in, and you can communicate that to us via email at hello@lifecoachuniversity.com. It brings us such joy to know that you are being helped. That's why we're here. That's why we do this. And if you don't mind us sharing your testimony, it really encourages others too, to know, how are they helped by being here? What are the different ways that people have been helped here? So you can always share your feedback at hello@lifecoachuniversity.com. Have a good afternoon or morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. And I will see you next week. Take care.